We are continuing our discussion today about Michael Heiser's Neo-Gnostic heresy, and it is important that we discuss this particular topic his whole theological system hinges on. All right. He says in his article, The Divine Counsel and Biblical Theology, page 11, the key passages are Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9, and its parallel, Deuteronomy 4, 19 through 20. All right. So Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9 says, when the Most High divided up to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, is the lot of his inheritance. Heiser is kind of ignoring what we just read because what he utilizes is the Septuagint reading. A number of Septuagint versions has angels of God in Deuteronomy 32, 8 instead of children of Israel. Remember that according to Heiser, Second Temple Judaism began using the word angel as an ontological term. So when the Septuagint says angels of God, those are actual angels, not gods, as Heiser wants. And this is according to his own theological expressions. In his book, Demons, page 241, he says, quote, as we noted earlier in our study in the Old Testament, angel is a functional, not an ontological term. It is, in effect, a job description. This circumstance, notice this real closely, this circumstance changes in the Second Temple period and the New Testament, where angel is a term used predominantly to distinguish loyal supernatural beings from evil rebellious ones, unquote. So here he's acknowledging that the term angel is not depicting these evil rebellious gods that he claims is discussed. So when he says the Septuagint represents his view, the Septuagint is Second Temple Judaism piece of literature. And if it says angels of God instead of the children of Israel, then it's referring to, according to his own theology, loyal supernatural beings, not evil rebellious ones. The Septuagint does not have sons of God, which Heiser would have desired. And his dependence is upon the Dead Sea Scrolls, where 33 manuscripts of the book of Deuteronomy discovered at Qumran have variants. Only 2 of them represent sons of God in Deuteronomy 32 out of 33. So that's his whole evidence that he has is 2 out of 33 Dead Sea Scrolls texts of Deuteronomy. Heiser writes, quote, that the text of LXX, the Septuagint, and the Dead Sea Scrolls is superior to the MT, Masoretic text, in Deuteronomy 32, 8, 9, is not in dispute, unquote. So he's saying that Deuteronomy 32, 8, 9, just these 2 verses, are wrong in the Masoretic text. The Septuagint, which says angels of God, and 2 out of 33 manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls representing the Son of God reading variant. That is all he has as evidence for his position, and that's not disputed. Really? Nobody's disputing that? I'm disputing it right now. By the way, that quote comes from his dissertation, page 83. It is disputed. Bottom line, it is disputed. From a textual critical position, we would ask why he picks a few Septuagint texts, which actually say angels, not sons of God, and 2 out of 33 Dead Sea Scroll copies of Deuteronomy. The Septuagint cannot be correct since Heiser assumes that 70 gods rule over 70 nations dispersed after the Babel, because the Septuagint has 72 nations mentioned in Genesis 10, which Heiser is well aware of. He acknowledges that in Unseen Realm, page 280, footnote 8. So this reading could not fit Heiser's theological perspective from the Septuagint. It would cause a major inconsistency. Accordingly, if Heiser upholds consistency, the Septuagint presents angels as an ontological term since it's Second Temple Jewish text. So it could not be Heiser's gods, And the number 70 does not match the 72 nations of the earth in the Septuagint Genesis 10. What about the two Dead Sea Scroll readings? These two manuscripts labeled 4Q Deuteronomy J and 4Q Deuteronomy Q also refute Heiser's opinion in the context of the scrolls themselves. For example, 4Q Deuteronomy Q has another variant in the Deuteronomy 32 verse 43, which reads, quote, "He will avenge the blood of his sons." Instead of the Masoretic reading, "He will avenge the blood of his servants." Okay, so here we find father and son language, and he's referring to sons, not sons of God, but sons referring to Israel, because it's loaded with references to Israel. And when the Masoretic text says the children of Israel in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 and 9, is not referring to sons of God or these supernatural beings, because son terminology frequently references Israel as a nation. Furthermore, father and son language in Deuteronomy 32 identifies God and Israel. Deuteronomy 32 verses 5 through 6 says, "They have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of," look at, "his children," right? "They are a perverse and crooked generation." Verse 6, "Do ye thus requite the Lord, O foolish people and unwise? Is not he thy father that hath bought thee? Hath he not made thee and established thee?" Deuteronomy 32, 18 through 20 says, "Of the rock that begat thee," all right, making him a father, "the rock that begat thee, thou art unmindful and hast forgotten God and that formed thee. And when the Lord saw it, he abhorred them because of the provoking of his sons and his daughters. And he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see that their end shall be, for they are a very froward generation, children in whom is no faith." So here we see the references to God, the Father of Israel, and Israel as the sons and daughters, the children of Israel. The Dead Sea Scroll readings, when it says sons of God, is understood as Israel, not some rebellious gods that Heiser's trying to say. And of course, the Septuagint is angels, which Heiser would have to say is obedient spiritual beings. So a sons of God variant would be consistent with father and son language in the context. The Dead Sea Scroll then makes sense that the translators accurately understood God's son as Israel and inserted the term angels of God, referring to the Septuagint, either assumes Israel as God's messenger, or having a manuscript that read sons of God thought to convert the phrase as angels, similar to how a few Septuagint manuscripts did with Genesis 6:2. But again, that would prove that sons of God means angels, an ontological term in Second Temple Judaism, which further refutes Heiser's theology. Scripture has a plethora of father-son language pertaining to the God and Israel. Psalm 29 has a chiastic form in verse 1, "Give unto the Lord, O ye mighty." The term mighty is Bene Elim. "Give unto the Lord glory and strength." The parallel of this chiasm is found in verse 11. "The Lord will give strength to his people, and the Lord will bless his people in peace." So the "O ye mighty," the Bene Elim, is not referring to ye God, sons of God, is referring to his people. This literary structure of a psalm indisputably identifies Bene Elim, translated as ye mighty in the King James Version, as God's people, Israel. Israel is first called Jehovah's firstborn son in Exodus 4:22 through 23. Hosea 11:1 says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him and called my son out of Egypt." Deuteronomy 14:1, "Ye children of the Lord your God." In Isaiah's prophecy of Israel's regathering, quote, "Bring my sons from far and my daughters from the ends of the earth." Isaiah 43:6. God calls Israel my sons. In Isaiah 45:11, God calls them my people, children. Isaiah 63:8. "Doubtless thou art our father, thou, O Lord, art our father." Isaiah 63:16, Isaiah 1:2. The Lord says, have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. Jeremiah 3 verse 4, wilt thou not from this time cry unto me, my Father, thou art the guide of my youth. Jeremiah 30:19, thou shalt call me my Father, and shalt not turn away from me. Deuteronomy 10:20, my children are gone forth of me. Malachi 3:17, and they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels, and I will spare them as a man spareth his own son that serveth him. Malachi 1:6, a son honoreth his father, a servant his master. If then I be a father, where is mine honor? And if I be a master, where is my fear? Hosea 1:10, ye are the sons of the living God. In my book, I document such terminology from both the Old Testament and Second Temple Jewish sources on pages 120 through 128, and close with the comment on 128, quote, he, referring to Heiser, assumes the sonship language infers divinity and misconstrues the proper interpretation of the main verse in the passage his entire theological perspective is established upon. Whether Deuteronomy 32:8 is taken from the Masoretic text, Children of Israel, or the Septuagint, Sons of God, the meaning in its context is still pointing to the nation of Israel as God's son. This is why Heiser has to downplay the abundance of father-son terminology identifying Israel throughout the Old Testament to convince his readers of his false interpretation, unquote. That's my book, The Unbiblical Realm, page 128. It's very clear that Heiser's Deuteronomy 32 paradigm passage, which his whole theology hinges on, does not represent his position. He's false teaching and has a false, inaccurate, completely inaccurate exegesis of the passage. He never handles any text of the Bible in its context. That's the major issue we constantly find from Heiser. His theological position is all over the place, but it's never in the Bible with context considered. Let's move on to his passage, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9 through 20. This passage states, unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord thy God hath divided unto all nations under the whole heaven. But the Lord hath taken you and brought you forth out of the iron furnace, even out of Egypt, to be unto him a people of inheritance, as ye are this day. Concerning this passage, Heiser teaches the passage, Deuteronomy 4:19 and 20, which is he's referring to, the passage clearly says that Yahweh, the God of Israel, allotted the sun and the moon and the stars worshipped by other people to those nations, and that God took Israel for his own. These portions of Deuteronomy refer to sun, moon, and star as Elohim, gods. And he references Deuteronomy 17:3 and Deuteronomy 29:25, allotted to the nations, Deuteronomy 29:25. As Deuteronomy 32:8 through 9 makes clear, these gods were allotted to the nations when God judged humanity at large at Babel, unquote. That's from his book Demons, page 149 through 150. And this is just a foolish expression. Nowhere does it indicate that in this passage that God allotted the sun, moon, and stars to be worshipped by other nations. Of course, Heiser's view is dependent on his allegorical interpretation of the meaning of the word stars to mean gods in Deuteronomy 4. Deuteronomy 4 is locating these stars and heavenly hosts in the sky. The expression, quote, lift up thine eyes unto heaven, unquote, tells us these are visible things, not Heiser's definition of gods as being disembodied in the unseen realm. The fact that not just Israel, but all the nations of the whole earth are able to see the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, as it states in the passage. This suggests that this is not individual divine beings ruling over separated nations, as Heiser expresses. The fact that the ancient world worshipped the stars and planets is a well-known fact, and I don't need to expound on that to prove it. It's obvious that the literal interpretation of this passage that does not mean the heavenly hosts are actual gods according to what the Bible actually teaches. Heiser's belief in the gods of Psalm 82 is in contrast to Deuteronomy 4 being judged on the earth. Psalm 82, verse 8, the gods are judged on the earth. These places, the stars and sun and moon and heavenly hosts in Deuteronomy 4 are in the heaven. Because their injustice to the people on earth in Psalms 82, 2 through 4, the gods are being judged. Contrast to these stars, moon, sun, so on and so forth in Deuteronomy 4 are in heaven. In Psalm 82, the injustice disrupting the foundations of the earth, Psalm 82 verse 5, right? So there's absolutely no relevant parallel of Deuteronomy 4 with chapter 32 of Deuteronomy or Genesis 10 through 11 or Psalms 82. Deuteronomy 4 can't be yoked with any of those passages, which Heiser constructs his entire theology on. Furthermore, Psalms 82 would carry a historical backdrop of a Persian period, being post-Babylonian captivity, as Heiser accurately acknowledges that fact, but Deuteronomy should be interpreted with an Egyptian and Ugaritic backdrop as being written by Moses. He's leaving Egypt and going into Canaan. But Heiser accepts heretical textual critical dating of the Torah, stating, quote, "This work was finished in exile in Babylon," unquote. That's from The Unseen Realm, page 192. Okay, in that quote, he's referring specifically to the book of Numbers, but obviously that's the Torah. The immediate context preceding Heiser's paradigm passage of Deuteronomy 4, 19 through 20 shows an unbroken sentence following into the passage that refutes his opinion. Notice, in context, Deuteronomy 4, verses 12 through 13, Moses is reminding the Israelites of when they accept the covenant with Jehovah on Mount Sinai, hearing his voice, but not seeing any similitude as he appeared in a fire. Deuteronomy 4, verses 14 through 18 expresses because they saw no similitude when they received this covenant, they should not make any images in the likeness of anything on earth, male, female, beast, fowl, creeping things, or fish. And without breaking the sentence, this context flows into discussing looking into the heavens to indicate they were not to make images of the sun, moon, stars to worship. Deuteronomy 4, verses 25 through 28 states, "When thou shalt beget children and children's children, and ye shall have remained long in the land, and shall corrupt yourself and make a graven image, or the likeness of anything, or shall do evil in the sight of the Lord thy God, to provoke him to anger, I call heaven and earth witness against you this day, that ye shall soon utterly perish from off the land whereunto ye go over Jordan to possess it. Ye shall not prolong your days upon it, but shall utterly be destroyed, and the Lord shall scatter you among the nations, and ye shall be left few in number among the heathen, whither the Lord shall lead you. And there ye shall serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell." Okay, so here he's rebuking the idea of making graven images, which is the corruption in the likeness of anything in heaven or earth, and for doing that, God will judge them and disperse them among the nations, where they will serve the gods of the nations, which are what? Made with man's hand, wood, stone. They don't see, they don't hear, they don't smell, they don't eat. These are idols, not true gods, like Heiser's trying to represent. Clearly, the sin in this context of Deuteronomy 4 is dealing with idolatry, gods made by the hands of man, not actual spiritual beings that exist in the unseen realm. Within the context of Deuteronomy 4 is verses 34 through 35, which states, "Or hath God essayed to go and take him a nation from the midst of another nation by temptations, by signs, and by wonders, and by war, and by a mighty hand, and by a stretched out arm, and by great terrors, according to all the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes. Unto thee it was showed that thou mightest know the Lord, he is God, and there is none else beside him. Clearly, monotheistic expression. Know there, in verse 39, know therefore this day, and consider it in thine heart, that the Lord, he is God, in heaven above, and upon earth beneath. There is none else. So Deuteronomy 4 frequently makes expressions of monotheism. There is none else. In heaven above, upon earth beneath, there is no other gods. Only Jehovah exists. All the other gods in Deuteronomy 4 are identified as idols. So Heiser's paradigm passage in Deuteronomy 4 is not discussing actual spiritual beings. Its proper interpretation is looking up into heaven, seeing the sun, moon, stars, which are called the heavenly hosts, all these objects in heaven, and making idols of them to worship. That's what was going on in the ancient world around Israel, and God's warning them not to do that. This is all about idolatry, making gods that don't actually exist. The sun, moon, and stars are literal celestial bodies that we look at today. They're not in the unseen realm. They're not spiritual entities. And Heiser has no basis for his entire theological perspective based on this chapter. In a previous episode of this podcast series on Heiser, we discussed how Heiser attempted to ignore the monotheistic language of the Old Testament by claiming that it represented incomparability expressions, which he makes the claim assumes other gods exist. Why would the Bible compare Jehovah to non-existing gods? We clearly refuted his false teaching on this topic, showing the errors of his incomparability claims, Isaiah chapters 44 through 49, which compares Jehovah to idols that are explained as non-existent gods. We've already gone through this. And Heiser's major issue is always ignoring context. He takes one verse, and because he's presupposing his theological paradigm is correct, he forces that false doctrine of his into one verse, allegorizes these words such as sun, moon, and stars to mean something that clearly a literal rendering and interpretation wouldn't allow. And then he's connecting it with a bunch of other verses and passages that have no accurate parallel cross-reference. Deuteronomy 4 cannot be connected with Psalm 82. And he's also guilty of the textual criticism, not only given a late date to the Torah, claiming its completion was in Babylon during the captivity, but he's also utilizing the Septuagint and Dead Sea Scrolls, claiming these are superior than the Masoretic text, the preserved text of the Hebrew Old Testament. And with that, he can't even uphold a consistency in his own theological position, because he's saying the Septuagint, Second Temple Jewish text, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Second Temple Jewish text, uses angel as an ontological term, which contradicts his theological position when we find that textual variant in these manuscripts. Not to mention the fact that there are very few manuscripts out of the plethora that we have. I mean, his entire system, when you actually nuance it on technicalities and not just take a general scope that he tries to ignore all these technicalities, if you take this information and actually compare it, his entire theological system is self-refuted, self-deconstructed, because it's just so off the wall. And he can sound very scholarly and impress people because he got a PhD from a communist college, but who cares? He can't interpret scriptures in his context. He can't even handle textual critical expressions accurately, and it doesn't confirm his theology to begin with. And it's dumbfounding that people haven't picked up on this and just utterly rejected him for the deconstructed theological position that he has. It's self-refuting. It cannot stand. It doesn't even have one leg to stand on. You don't turn to allegorical interpretations, faulty textual criticism, and a self-contradicting theological position to teach the Bible. This is utterly heretical, and Christians should know better. Christians should read the Bible. Christians should see the context of Deuteronomy 4. Christians should be able to read the context of Deuteronomy 32 and see that this is self-refuting in the context and doesn't uphold what Heiser claims. All right, so next episode, we're going to deal with Psalm 82, which is Heiser's major passage. This is the passage that converted him into a polytheist when he read it in Hebrew, according to his own testimony. So we will look at that passage, and then I'm hoping to be done with discussing Heiser. All right, so if you want more details on Heiser, and obviously a half an hour podcast doesn't go too far, but if you want more details, thorough, technical, scholarly rebuttal of Heiser's theology, get my book, The Unbiblical Realm, Refuting the Divine Counsel of Michael Heiser's Deuteronomy 32 Worldview. But after the next episode on Psalm 82, we're going to move on to something different. With that being said, we're going to end this episode. This is Heath Henning. Thank you for listening to Truth Watchers podcast. For more fascinating facts, check us out on truthwatchers.com, because sound apologetics and exegesis of scriptures is important for all of God's children, as is indicated in 3 John verse 4. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth.